One, two. Just in control panel.
Here, can I see?
That's it.
There it is. Set.
That's
Yeah,
so
just the
easy.
gear. Well, it's
I
good
think
that it's easy.
The sound is working, I think, right?
Yeah. See that?
See that? Okay.
Yep.
Good,
We
good.
can check. Hold on, one
And
more
the link,
thing.
the link I need for this is
Should
this,
be
that
that.
one?
Yeah,
Okay.
probably.
Okay.
Oh, that was Windows button,
Oh, right.
which I always
I'm
do.
used to.
So we want microphone.
Okay. Good.
2.
Okay. Good.
Just so we don't have this built-in one here, but yeah, control. Yep.
Okay.
I always do that.
I know.
Here, there's a door there. Testing. Testing. Testing 1, 2. Testing. Testing.
Are you? Kathy, okay. What are the some crazy chairs? Yeah.
Yeah.
What am I in Star Trek?
Yeah.
Seriously? Wow.
They're pretty good.
Yeah.
These were, we used to have break.
Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, they do in the table
Oh,
too. And also, I think they changed.
I think, you know, we'll have you stand up.
Out of row.
I haven't really
Because
been to
people
this
just sit
since
here.
it's been arranged.
Well, I'm sure. I can, my son would absolutely be good.
Minutes into the agenda.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know, there's another thing going on competing with.
Yes, I
so,
heard.
Yeah.
Just looking in front of the
Sure, yeah.
Just put next to the food. Oh, yeah, that would be.
So did you meet Kathy? Okay.
So I've been, Pamela has contacted me, so she had contacted me this morning just to verify. I said to her I was gonna hand out, so that's on the screen, I guess now.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me, I appreciate it. I guess I thought I was gonna fix it for you guys today. Joint finance actually took up the budget yesterday. But I still have to. And so I know you had a little business before you need to speak, so I'll stay back.
We'll just take a welcome and then we'll have you first. And then when you're done, we say.
Oh. No, I haven't messed with progress. We believe exactly. So Or illegally.
Yeah.
Yeah, not on the street. Plaza here, not like that, but still, not a response. So in 10 minutes, what, 5 minutes? Sure.
Okay, is it possible to, which computer are we using to project?
That one.
Okay, do you want to say that?
Straight ahead. Yeah, on the left, the one on the left.
Oh, here.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all right.
Then I know the garbage cans are on this one.
Oh.
You can use my bag as garbage.
Only a mom would say that. Here's his pockets. Here. He's got garbage. So, yeah.
Oh.
Oh, you got a toggle?
Yeah.
There you go. Oh, it flashed and then it went away. It was there. There you go.
Okay, who's going first? The other one?
We'll have Kathy go first, just so she can leave.
Then we'll switch it back.
Yep, and then I'm just gonna welcome Amy and Pamela for returning and whoever else. All right, should we go ahead and get started? I have 11 o'clock on the dot.
So, yes, so let people know that if we're talking, they should flip front so we can film. And there are about 5 people watching right now. That's good. Yeah.
Hello, welcome. Welcome to the last Librarians Assembly Business Meeting of the year. I'm Katie, and I'm going to introduce our ASPRO representative, Kathy Kilgore, and let her take it away so she can leave. But just a reminder, we are streaming this live, and the recording will be available on YouTube later on today.
Well, good morning. My name is Kathy Kilgore, and I am the lobbyist for ASPRO, the Academic Staff Professionals Representation Organization. Or when I talk to legislative offices, I usually just say I represent the academic staff in the UW system, which is less of a mouthful than that. I have been working with ASPRO for about 15 years now, but ASPRO has been in existence since 1989, when it was formed on the UW-Madison campus, kind of as wanting to have a voice for academic staff. When the faculty had a voice at the Capitol, academic staff felt that they needed one as well, and had formed their organization. So we are a professional organization that's dues-driven outside of the university, but we represent UW employees, particularly academic staff. So you asked me here today to give a little bit of a legislative/budget update. And as I was saying when I first arrived, I thought I was going to have a big scoop for you guys, that we were going to have a new newsletter, because a week, unfortunately, in this day, 1 week old is old news. But I do have that copy of that newsletter to hand out for those of you who are here if you'd like one. I thought we were going to have, the UW budget was going to be taken up yesterday by the Joint Finance Committee, so I thought I would have a new newsletter and new information to give. While I do have new information to give, the Joint Finance Committee did not take up the UW budget yesterday because apparently they are still have not decided on what to do about tuition. Do they increase? They will not increase tuition. They've already said that, but the idea of will they cut tuition or will they continue to freeze tuition? And so that is a decision that still is yet to be made. The Assembly Republicans have already said that they support a freeze for tuition, yet again, for both years of the biennium. But it is the Senate that yet has not come together and made a decision as to what their position is on it yet. So they haven't been able to negotiate it to make the final package. I guess I assume that the rest of the package has also been decided then. But when there's one big item like that hanging out there, because if you were to, there are some senators who've been very public about their belief that that tuition should be cut. Some of those senators also believe, however, that the UW should not be backfilled for that amount that tuition is cut. So that's a big item that leaves hanging out there. So while we believe other items of the governor's budget that he has proposed for funding are still, have been pretty much decided. When you have something big like that still hanging out there, we're still not sure. So I'll talk about a couple of things. And as the newsletter said last week, and this is still true, the non-fiscal policy items were removed from the budget. The faculty, instructional, academic staff workload, policy, monitoring, and rewarding that had been proposed in the governor's budget was removed. The mandatory internships for students to graduate with a bachelor's. There were another of the academic freedom, or excuse me, the freedom of expression legislation or language that the governor had put into the budget. That was all removed as non-fiscal policy. And so we'll get to that in a minute, what's going on with those things. But talk about not only that talk more about the funding right now. So the $43.5 million that the governor had proposed as part of performance measures. We believe that that number, as of last week, was still pretty solid at $43.5 million. We also believe, however, that the legislature is looking to change those performance measures. The governor had laid out a number of performance measures, roughly 5 categories, and then a number of criteria under those categories. And then each campus would be ranked under those categories. Those ranked highest in that category would receive the most money from that pot of money. And then the lowest would receive the lowest amount of money from that pot of money. And so we believe that the legislature is changing that. We've heard different things, whether it's going to be kind of a grant program where a campus comes forward with a plan of how they would, for example, graduate more students in 4 years. And they feel that they could need $4.5 million to do this in this amount of time. So that kind of a grant program, or there could be some other, still they can maybe pick a couple of criteria, meet those criteria and receive funds. So that is one area that we think, well, the funding is still there, but the criteria around it will change. Then that $35 million in tuition backfill. This money has kind of had a target on it since the day that the governor introduced the budget. Legislators began to say already that a tuition cut across the board wasn't the most helpful for students, and therefore maybe some of that money could go to financial aid, maybe it could go to other things. That money still kind of hangs out there because we're still deciding what we're doing with tuition. But the one thing that I had heard last week was that while some of that money would go to financial aid, that maybe some of that money could be used to go towards UW employee compensation, as the governor had proposed a 2% and 2% increase, but had tied the savings from self-insurance to that compensation. And since the Joint Finance Committee has signaled that they will not approve the self-insurance contracts, so that leaves a $60 million hole in the budget. And so some of that money could be taken from the money that was put aside for $35 million for tuition backfill. If they don't cut tuition, that $35 million is freed up. And so therefore, maybe some of that money could go towards that 2% and 2% for UW employees. So that's one of the things that we were hearing last week, and we'll still wait to see what we hear more about that as we go into next week. Now also, while that is the fiscal, some of the fiscal items, there's always, even though they removed a number of non-fiscal policy items, we always are on alert for other items to go back into the budget. Last 2 years ago in the last budget, that's where we saw the Joint Finance Committee had put in the provisions about tenure, about shared governance, and also about academic staff appointments, which the governor later vetoed on the academic staff appointments. But that's where we saw some of those bigger policy changes came from Joint Finance. So we're all watching to see if there's something more coming than just the fiscal items that we've been discussing or have been more front page news. Also, of course, the Republicans announced about $3 million to go to the Tommy G. Thompson Center. Still kind of fleshing out those ideas to just know what we read in the papers on that one, really. But that money would come to UW-Madison, primarily for that center, and about $500,000 of that $3 million would then go to other campuses to bring on speakers to their campuses regarding public policy. And so that's what we know about that. We don't know exactly where that $3 million is coming from. I kind of thought it was coming probably from that $35 million, but I guess we'll have to wait. So we've been told, or what kind of the hint was at the end of finance yesterday, is that the UW budget will come up on Thursday at 11 o'clock at the start of their agenda, so this Thursday, tomorrow. But I don't know. Yesterday, also some of the rumors you were hearing around the Joint Finance room is they were probably going to take a long time to get this figured out. So Thursday, long time. Don't know. I guess we'll see. I'll see what happens tomorrow. So those are a couple things about the budget right now. Some of the items that we had talked about in this talk that came out for, let's see if I do have those copies. So some of the non-fiscal policy items that we had talked about in the newsletter, and that's, if you want to take one down and pass it around. Some of those items, when they were removed as non-fiscal policy, they had mentioned that these items could be introduced as standalone bills. And so since we already knew that this free speech items were going to be removed, had been removed and were going to be introduced as bills, because there's two. One's already been introduced and had a hearing a couple weeks ago, and one has circulated for co-sponsorship and not been introduced. So we already knew free speech was coming. The legislation that's been proposed goes further than what the governor had proposed in the budget, talking more about disruptions and penalties for disrupting. And one of them goes a little bit further. The one that hasn't been introduced yet also talks about even if the university can't guarantee the safety of the speaker still should be coming and shouldn't be prevented from coming to the campus to speak, the way that reads. So that one still hasn't been introduced yet. But since the time, a week ago, of that newsletter, 3 bills have circulated for co-sponsorship that are based on the non-fiscal policy that the governor had proposed. One of them is the creation of 3-year degrees. That bill is circulating for co-sponsorship. That would require each campus to have plans for 25% of their majors as a 3-year degree by the end of this year, which seems to be a pretty quick turnaround, 25%, especially when the governor had proposed 10% by the end of the year. The bill says 25% by the end of the year, and we don't know when the bill will pass. Then the other part of that one is then 50% of the degrees would have a plan for 3-year degree by the end of the following year. So that's one bill that's pending that has been introduced. Then there was a provision in the governor's budget requiring an internship to graduate with a bachelor's degree. That has been introduced as, or will be introduced as separate legislation, but that does not go nearly as far as what the governor had proposed. It just says that each major on the campus will have a up to 3 credit internship available that students could take if they wish. So it's not mandatory for the student to take it, it's just mandatory for the campuses to develop the plan and offer it as a up to 3 credits. And having taken 2 of those, one for my major, one for my minor when I went to college, so I guess I assumed that was already a thing. So I'm not sure if that's for all majors or minors everywhere. And the other one is regarding early college credit transfer policies that the governor had proposed is exactly the same as the legislation that's being circulated for co-sponsorship. So that's a little bit about the budget and some of those bills. Quickly, because I'm probably closing into my 10 minutes, is self-insurance. As everybody's been reading in the papers, Joint Finance Committee signaled that they will not approve the contracts. So that had been leading to the question of, well, then what happens next? What we believe is the group insurance board is actually meeting today. They had planned on this meeting. They set their schedule for the year very early. Kind of at the end of the last year, they set their schedule for this year, so this was a planned meeting date. I'm sure they will be talking about self-insurance at that meeting. But what we have kind of heard, because if the contracts are denied, the regional plans will also not go forward, because the health plans that bid on the regional plans that had been chosen to administer, they have bid on, they placed their bids believing that the state would carry the risk under self-insurance. And if self-insurance contracts are denied, then the regional plans won't go forward because of the way things were bid. Might be something that we see come up in a year or 2 again, but right now I think you will see them kind of going back to the health plans that they're already working with. And knowing that they have to roll this out in a few months for open enrollment, that it would be, they're gonna have to have a quick turnaround on that as well. The concern has been, as I already stated, that $60 million that had been rolled into the budget. What happens? I think that for some of that funding went to UW employee raises, salary increases, and some of it went to public education, K-12. So where does that money come from? That still remains to be seen. Again, manageable $35 million, that backfill is some of it, perhaps. The Joint Finance Committee could tell ETF to find the money. The concern has been if they tell them to find the money, that could mean increases to state employees to pay, more deducted out of their paycheck, more when they go to the doctor to pay for. That cost could be passed on to employees. But there's been some reports, and I honestly don't know the whole scope of it yet. There's been some reports that ETF has built up a reserve fund beyond what they are mandated to have as they were beginning to prepare for self-insurance. And so that money is in a pot there that can really only should be used for health insurance. And so maybe somehow, and again, I don't know what you do with that pot. I don't know all the strings attached to that pot of money and how it could be possibly used to maybe cut costs or be redispersed to employees or agencies that technically they are paid. In some ways, they pay for the fringe benefits of their employees. So I don't understand how it all works, but there's been some talk of how could that pot of money be used somehow. But not to go towards public education, it would have to be used, or risk a lawsuit, it'd have to be used for insurance purposes. So those are some of the things that are going on right now. It's been a busy time. Usually it's a busy time just with the budget, but right now with the other bills floating around there, it's also been a busy time with following those as well. And one other piece of legislation I wanted to bring up that we follow for employees, that's not such a big deal for the university, but it's employees. And that is changes to WRS, raising the minimum retirement age, and increasing how they calculate your retirement benefit annuity from 3 years to 5 years. This legislation has been introduced every year for the last 3 or 4 years. But this time the legislation has changed a bit in that it would only apply to new employees. So those of you who are already in the WRS, it would not affect. But people who are hired new to WRS, if the bill were to go forward, that's who the legislation would affect. And so that previously had been kind of like an age limit. At a certain age, it doesn't affect you. So they've made it might be more complicated to administer, but it would not affect current employees.
What age are they thinking?
It was I think it was 5-year increase. And of course, that's the number I shouldn't even brought it up because I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. I have a lot of numbers in my head today, and that's not that one. So, but it was a 5-year, I think 5-year increase. So if 65 would be 70, 62 for protective services would be 67. Is that right? But now I'm on tape mode. Yes.
Maybe this was already decided, but with student fees, there was.
That was removed from the budget. The eligible, that was removed from the budget. We are hearing that will come up as a separate legislation. Not really sure exactly what it's going to look like yet. Of course, places are full of rumors, and so it could be just like what the governor introduced. It could be worse or it could be better. But we are definitely following that, not only for our Madison numbers, but there are other campuses that are very dependent upon those. The athletic departments are funded by it. Employee positions and advising are funded by it, and so it's something we're watching close.
So for the free speech legislation, so how deep? So are they getting into if you participate in protesting, that you could be expelled? I mean, is that where it's kind of going?
I think it's beyond just if you're disrupting, and I think that in the language of the bill that had the hearing, the Kramer-Voss bill that had a hearing, I think it goes beyond, and there's definitions of if you're acting, and I can't think of the words right off the top of my head, but obnoxious, boisterously, you're disrupting, and the speaker is not allowed to speak. I think there's one time, if it happens twice, you're expelled, I think is what the legislation spells out, I think. I will say that in here, listening to the testimony, the bill's sponsors seem to be interested in working on those definitions of boisterous and obnoxious, and I think I did bring the bill actually with me in the back of my seat, but then the definition, but they did not seem as interested in moving on the penalties or in negotiating on the penalties. But that is, I think it was 2 strikes. A little different game.
So do you think academic staff will get a raise anytime soon?
I think that there will be raises for state employees. I have heard positive things about funding the 2 and 2 that the governor included in the budget for all state employees. Of course, it both come in the second year of the biennium, as proposed by the governor. One comes very late in the second year of the biennium, like May, I think. So 1 month before the end. It is then what happens when that money comes over to the UW. Now there are, and this is more of a UPS rather than an HR design issue, so it's that I'm more familiar with, but there are policies for the regents that say there are no more across the board raises. That's not how the money is to be distributed. But I do know from some conversations back when they approved the 2 and 2 that there was talk of, it's been so long since everybody got anything, that maybe there has to be a reconsideration of that and maybe more board decision. But that money will basically, if let's say 2 and 2 gets passed, when that first 2 comes over to the UW, the president gives direction to the campuses on how to distribute it. Some guidance. And then the chancellors have the end to decide how it gets distributed based on the president's guidelines. And so I would hope that academic staff would be getting increases as well. I can't say for certain that some may choose, well, this 2% should go to faculty, the next 2% will go to academic staff. I don't know.
And it's not consistent
potentially across campuses. It's really.
Could be different. I mean, the president will still give guidance, and perhaps even, like I said, at the Board of Regents meeting last year when they approved the 2 and 2 as a request, at that time, when there were regents who felt that it should be distributed across the board because it's been so long. And so maybe that's what the president will direct. We don't know.
This is right.
Yes.
Small thing. So at this point, all of the regents are Walker appointees.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay.
I do think so.
Yep.
I think the last ones departed.
Yeah.
Last year.
Johnny Evers, he's
Oh, right.
He's a non-voting member, but yes, he's still on.
I have a question just about ASPRO in general. So who decides, who like directs what issues you work on?
We have a board of directors. We have members from each campus that has members. They are allowed to have one board representative. It is based on 100 members. So right now, the UW-Madison has 3 board members and a non-voting member on the board. And so they make up the largest number of campus. And so the board of directors decides what issues we take positions on. They give me the direction on where we go or what we do. So most of what is reporting on issues. But what our message has basically been, more money for the university, those kinds of things. That's been our message.
Are you advocating against some of these bills that have been introduced?
We are talking about them at our board meeting tomorrow.
Okay. So
We had concerns about them when they were in the budget. Some board members had concerns on those. We had been hearing that they would cut out as non-fiscal policy, so we hadn't spent a lot of time on that. Had spent more time on the fiscal matters. Yes.
So you said that the Joint Finance Committee took out all of the governor's non-fiscal, but then they tend to put their own back in. At the end, or they have.
They have, yes.
And they justify this? Okay. Do we have any notion of what they might be considering?
I have not heard of it. No, I will say 2 years ago we didn't hear of it. It was a surprise to me. And so we don't know. I will also say, in the past, the Fiscal Bureau identifies non-fiscal policy items and provides that publicly. The co-chairs then either remove all of it or pick some of it to remove, or maybe they ignore it all. This is the first time in a long time that the co-chairs said all items come out. And so the message has been,
The budget should be.
yes, should be a fiscal document, not all the policy. If there is no dollar amount to go with it, no line item on it for our fiscal impact, then it should be. That has been the message that's been given for other clients on this.
It might be a sign.
Yes, must be. My time has elapsed. So, one really quick pitch, if you aren't a member of ASPRO already, we encourage you to join. We, like I said, are an organization that is dependent on our dues paying members, and we are losing members to retirement faster than we are able to recruit new members. And so if you have any questions, the contact information for ASPRO is on the newsletter that I have distributed, and I will also leave some applications here for those of you who aren't members that you might be interested in taking one. And if you are a member, you could take one and try to recruit a colleague. So, thank you very much.
All right, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we just have a quick update from our steering committee. We asked for volunteers to replace our outgoing members, and we had exactly 4 volunteers. They are, and I'll ask you to stand up, Amy Blazell, works across the cube for me, LTG, Pamela, who's agreed to stay on. Thank you, Pamela. Heather Scheinman from Steambot, thank you for coming. And Anna Simon from Art. She came. I didn't expect her to be here today, so. All right, and because we have a slate of 4, correct me if I'm wrong, Beth or Pamela, we do not need to do a vote.
I think we just have to send it out, right?
We just will send it out as our slate.
Yeah,
Okay.
it might be nice, I could move, I don't know if we have a forum or whatever.
We could put together a quick. Yeah, I don't know if we really have quorum today, but I can put a quick survey for our slate.
Well, I was just gonna say, move to accept, accept the nominees by acclamation. And, so we just say, these are our nominees, we say they're all gonna, we move to put them in the steering committee.
That's right. Following Robert's rules, I second that.
Oh,
Okay.
Then you just ask for a vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? No opposed? Any abstentions? No? Okay, movement passes. Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Julie with a treasury update. If it's going to allow you to give a treasury update. Yay! Okay, so here's the treasury update. I have a handout for you all. So, we had done a projected budget based on our spending for the last fiscal year. So, last year, again, these are like averages. So we've just kind of budgeted, probably spent about 400 on IT, about 287 on eTalk Run, et cetera. We thought that in total, we probably spent about $816 this year. Our actual spending, we spent a little bit more on IT this year. We decided to spend more on food since we ran out last year. And we spent just like a little bit more on the book sharing program, which is like a very small one-time program. But we spent much less on eTalk Run this year and on the Librarians Assembly business meetings than we anticipated. So all in all, we spent $1,005.46. So the difference only being $189, that's pretty good. I think we came in pretty close to what we thought we would spend. So on the handout, just so that you know how we spent the money that we raised, this is what we spend on for treats and coffee for Librarians Assembly business meetings, such as this one, eTalk Run events, book sharing, and finally the high tea event. So just to compare it, high tea is, as usual, our most expensive event of the year, followed by eTalk Run, which I believe have still been very popular. We've had good attendance at this, so we think that we're spending Librarians Assembly funds in a very responsible way. Here's the pie chart. At the Librarians Assembly High Tea event, we raised $665 in cash and $415 in checks. We had no change that we raised this year. So grand total of $1,080. So that helped us to make up the funds that we spent over the course of the year. So current balances are $59.04, and in checking, $1,331.31. It just ended up that way. So that's where we are right now. Any questions? Yeah,
Whose dog is that?
I don't know whose dog that is. We're just giving a good side eye, so that's right.
I said that.
Any other questions about the budget? Or treasury? Thanks.
Excellent job being treasurer this year. Thank you.
It was fun. All right. I have an update from Todd Nicholson Ambling, who could not make it today, for professional concerns. He states the Professional Concerns Committee is planning to examine how it can best provide advice and listening sessions for professional concerns in the area of library work that are not already being covered by other committees. such as HR and the Equity and Diversity Committee. We do not wish to be redundant, and we hope we can address items not addressed elsewhere. So in the next year, he hopes to kind of see where professional concerns can kind of fit in. They did not have a great attendance this year for their listening sessions, so we're going to try and see what else they can do. And now I'll turn it, now that Julie just sat down, I'll turn it back over to her to provide the University Library Committee update that usually Ian Benton gives, but he can't be here today.
So Ian typed up some notes for me, which I will read for all of you on behalf of Ian. So Ed Van Gemert had some updates at our last meeting. Engberg Anderson's timeline has been extended. So the request for local data to connect UW Library's current situation and configuration to the future plan. They're going to focus more attention on the path that takes us from the current reality into the future vision. We had one nomination, self-nomination for University Library Committee Chair, and that was Sabina Grossa. So she is going to be the new chair of the ULC. There was a presentation on the Steenbach Library Biocommons by Jessica Newman, Jerry Whitmore, and Dr. Jeree Bryant. Main points of their presentation: biosciences are very diverse. They exist in 39 different majors on campus, and the coordination is complex. Additionally, the stakeholders for these programs are very diverse. The scope of the Biocommons program goes beyond the walls of Steenbach Library. So it's really about creating community for bio stakeholders. Steenbach Library Services seek every opportunity to synergize with Biocommons initiatives. Non-traditional uses of the space are actively sought. Student ambassadors are carrying the message forward and promoting social engagement. And assessment plans are being implemented for the coming year for Biocommons. So they're examining cohorts of STEM students who've made use of these spaces and services. Finally, a resource management redesign update was provided at the last ULC meeting. There's a project goal to increase the efficiency locally and throughout customers across the UW system. They had some outside consultants, Carol Diedrichs, Emeritus Director of Ohio State University, and Lisa German, Dean of University of Houston. I'm assuming those are libraries. I would assume libraries. Beginning with a functional reorganization, followed by movement of personnel, and then to developing teams to develop and articulate workflows. That is the direction. Key changes that they expect: electronic resource management team will be bundling acquisitions, activation, and access. In fact, I will just give these notes to you. So, movement of fast cataloging. See fast cat, and I think of something else. Processing to acquisitions, and implementing shelf-ready processing for key jobbers. Does anyone know what a jobber is?
Vendors. Yeah, book vendors.
Book vendors. Relocating acquisition, electronic resource management team, and preservation to collections and research services. Staffing for these changes is to be determined, and reorganization timeline calls for implementation by the beginning of the 2017 fiscal year. So rather, next steps in this process are revision of PDs, charges to newly formed teams, and examining workflows over the next 2 years, and finally, a continual review for improvement. Any questions that I will try to answer? The ULC that was our final meeting for the year. They take a break over the summer, and we'll meet again in, I believe, late August.
Are you still serving now?
I am done.
Do you know who your replacement?
Maybe has another one. That I don't know. I know that Ian will be continuing for a second year. I don't know who's replacing me. Any other questions? Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Next, we have an update from Pamela on the Cassies.
Very good. On Monday, April 24th, they had the last Cassie Brown Bag of the year. It actually took place in the biotech building, which I had never been to before. And it was in a room that was immediately previously occupied by many elementary school children. So it was a little sticky, but it was informative. They talked about the work of the Cassie. Actually, Kathy was there giving us an update. She was going to have all of the answers by the time we met here today, and was very excited with the fact that things would be, there would be results to report. I guess we see how government works. So she spent a good part of the meeting kind of just giving an update. Then we actually went around the room and shared information about each of our Cassies. The Do-It was there. They had 4 people in attendance. Their Cassie has disbanded and is hoping to kind of reestablish itself. So they were looking for ideas about things that things to yes.
What is Cassie Assembly?
The Librarians Assembly is actually the Cassie for the general library system. It's the Committee on Academic Staff Issues. I guess I should find the terms. So, so there were interesting program ideas. The law school does a lot of programming. They had a session on working with multi-generational employees, like older and millennials and people coming up, and so that seemed a very intriguing idea. There were people who really did spend a lot of time trying to make sure that academic staff were also at the table when deans were meeting with faculty. So there seems to be a lot of negotiation between those different interest groups. And I was able to talk about Librarians Assembly. It was a couple of days before the high tea, the day before. And so they were very intrigued about our awards that we were giving and buttons we were planning to distribute. So any questions? It was actually, usually they only have 2 brown bags a year, 1 each semester. So it was unusual to have had 2 for spring semester, but it seems that they really are trying to get people together to kind of share ideas and make sure that everybody has representatives that are in touch and interested in pursuing the goals of the organization. Any questions? Other than, I'll be fine. Okay, thank you.
Next up, we have academic staff assembly update from Tom.
All right. Since the last Librarians Assembly meeting, there have been 2 academic staff assembly meetings. There was a meeting on April 10th, and there was also another meeting on May 8th. So I'll try and not repeat some of the stuff that Kathy Kilgore went through, because obviously the academic staff assembly covers a lot of those same issues, and actually Kathy presents there pretty regularly. So as I go through my notes, I'll try and see if I can skip some of those things. From the April 10th meeting, one of the things that has been like an actively discussed topic on campus for many years is what's called salary compression. There was a report that was put together for the academic staff assembly on what's called Category B salary compression. So this is an issue that's more relevant, I think, to like this specific report to other academic staff on campus, not necessarily academic librarians, because we're actually Category A. I checked the Human Resources website. So if you're an academic librarian, then you're Category A. So this is about academic staff Category B. Salary compression is where.
Tom?
Yes.
Would this affect? So with a lot of other academic staff.
I know, so like there are a lot of different job titles.
Like in the whole IT range.
Yeah, so I was looking through that list, and without getting a full list of all the staff in the general library system, it would be difficult to say who isn't. But if you are an academic librarian, if you have that job title, then you're Category A, not Category B. But it's possible, likely, that there are some Category B people in the general library system. So salary compression is where someone who has been employed for many years, because of the lack of raises that have happened, that a new person that gets hired is hired at almost the same level. And so the concern is that maybe like 4 staff that could be easily hired to outside of the university. That not having those raises doesn't provide like a lot of incentive for people to move up and do other new creative things on campus. Okay, so that report was presented, so the committee was charged with gathering and analyzing information on compression of academic staff salaries within Category B and making recommendations to the academic staff assembly concerning policies and procedures that can be used to minimize and mitigate this inequity. Category B academic staff include those directly involved in instruction and research specifically. So a lot of science academic staff that are part of Category B. So I have a little bit more information about that. So I just wanted to read the definition. Yeah. So just like to have the specific definition, salary compression occurs when there's only a small difference in pay between employees regardless of their experience and productivity. So that's like the official university definition. Later on, during the meeting from May 8th, there were some recommendations that were presented, so I'll get back to this issue in just a little bit. So on April 10th, they presented the report, and then on May 8th, they presented the recommendations. The most important thing that happened at the April 10th meeting was Professor Blank presented some of the things that she's going to be working on in the upcoming year. And so going through those, so obviously Kathy Kilgore talked about the state budget, and that does include more money for the UW system, and that includes potential 2% increases for staff. Last year's budget from the state did not include maintenance money for UW facilities. They're going to be including additional maintenance money, so hopefully maybe some of the campus libraries will get some of that facility money. It's very unclear right now what will happen with the federal budget. So obviously our campus receives a lot of money from federal granting agencies. So you've probably seen the news. There are deep cuts proposed for agencies that are important to UMass, like the National Science Federation, NEA, NIH, NOAA, Pell Grants, for example. Other cuts that were just announced earlier this week include things for like work study, student work study. So that's going to be something that we'll have to keep track of. UMass has launched some initiatives regarding diversity and campus climate. There is a campus climate survey for students that was sent out earlier this spring. The university is working on a diversity inventory project. Hopefully, the campus will get the results back from those surveys and have that analyzed for presentation later in the fall. So those are things that we can look forward to. The university is working on putting together a training program for all teaching assistants on cultural competence. So that's another thing that could potentially impact the kind of library instruction we might do in the fall. This is another report that was presented during the April 10th meeting, and then there were some recommendations that were presented in the May 8th meeting, so I'll get to that in a minute. So there was another report that was put together, Academic Staff Work-Life Survey. So Russell Diamond presented the white paper from the Academic Staff Work-Life Survey. The work group identified a picture of how academic staff's unrecognized work, compensation, and state politics influence retention and morale. All right, so moving on to the notes from May 8th, that was the next meeting that we had. There was the list of recommendations that were related to the academic staff salary compression report. I'm going to go through and take a look at those. Right, so here we go. So Academic Staff Assembly endorses the recommendations from the report of the ad hoc committee and salary Category B academic staff salary compression. So as part of the titling and total compensation study, the University of Wisconsin should conduct a pay equity study for all Category B academic staff employees. The study should identify and remedy existing instances of salary compression, as well as plan for future ways to identify and continually address new instances of salary compression. The university should ensure compliance with the new performance management policy, confirming that annual performance reviews are conducted for each employee as a critical component to employee development. Annual reviews should include when appropriate reviews for change of duties with corresponding pay adjustments, reviews for promotion, and reviews for increased job security. So these are recommendations that were sent. So there was a report, and then a short list of recommendations that were then sent to the chancellor. All right, so then again, the recommendations from the academic staff work-life survey. So I talked about the report earlier, and now I'm going to talk about the recommendations that were sent from that report to the chancellor and provost. Okay, on a later page. Good. So this is the recommendations from the 2016 Academic Staff Work-Life Survey Report. Academic Staff Assembly endorses the recommendations from the 2016 Academic Staff Work-Life Survey White Paper. Leaders at all levels at UW-Madison should recognize both formally and informally the entirety of work that individual members of the academic staff do. The amount of work expected for academic staff jobs should be reasonable both on paper and in practice. University leadership should devote internal resources to compensation, recognition, and other efforts to counteract the effect of state politics on academic staff retention and morale. And university leadership should create and regularly communicate a credible long-term compensation strategy that first stabilizes compensation at its current level and then increases it to competitive levels. So obviously, for all of us, compensation is an issue that everyone's thinking about, and so the Academic Staff Assembly is doing what it can to put those issues before the chancellor and the provost, and hopefully some action will be taken. Obviously, it's somewhat up to the state government to see if more money can be allocated to the university, and so we'll look forward to hearing more information from Kathy Kilgore and others about what happens at the state level. All right, so another issue that has been discussed over the last few years is the university needs to hire and retain people at the academic staff level who are working in certain jobs that outside of the university would not necessarily require a certain degree. So the university has been having trouble hiring people like IT workers, for example, and other people. But because of traditional requirements for academic staff, there are requirements for certain degrees or certain kinds of certificates, but there aren't necessarily the most qualified people out there are not people who necessarily have those specific degrees. So they're looking at changing some of the degree requirements for academic staff so they can hire in additional people to do some of that work. It seems like this is mostly an issue for IT workers, but there could be other people on campus for which this is an issue. And so the Academic Staff Assembly forwarded a very short recommendation changing academic staff degree requirements. So this is the motion regarding changes to degree requirements for academic staff positions. The Academic Staff Assembly at UW-Madison approves adding the following explicit exceptions to the bachelor's degree requirement for new or existing academic staff positions. These positions do not include formally classified positions that are now academic staff positions and did not previously require a degree. So first, history of past recruitment issues with the position, including the lack of diverse applicant pool or failed searches. So for example, if they put a search out repeatedly and the reason that they can't hire people is because of the degree requirement, but there are qualified people out there, they want to remove the bachelor's degree requirement for that kind of position. So there are different kinds of positions, mostly it seems like IT positions for which this is an issue. People who have alternate credentialing available for a specific field. So there may be some other kind of credentialing the person can go through to become qualified for a specific position. You want to make sure that people who are qualified that have those alternate credentials can also apply for and get positions. And then duties that involve working with special populations or community organizations. So this would be people who are hired to work with like a specific population. There may not be like, for example, like daycare or something like that. Maybe it's not required that the person has a bachelor's degree to work in that specific kind of position. So other things from the meeting. There was a very short provost report. The provost reported that the state budget really, compared to previous years, is mostly good news for the UW system. UW-Madison will not be receiving any cuts that we know of right now. UW system may be receiving some new funding, and then UW system will decide where that funding will go after that's worked out. One of the issues that has been kind of kicking around are the performance metrics. Kathy Kilgore talked about this a little bit. It's sort of gone back and forth. Will the university be required to work up to achieving a certain performance metric before it gets a certain amount of funding for certain programs? One of the specific points that the provost and the chancellor have made in the last 2 meetings is that the way those requirements are set essentially determines who gets the money. So if a requirement is worded in a certain way, it essentially determines whether it's like a certain campus will or not get that funding. So because the campuses are all different, so because UW-Madison is very different from UW-Eau Claire, for example, in some ways it doesn't necessarily make sense to put all of the universities on the same sort of ruler, because for some things there's no way that any of the other UW system schools could compete with UW-Madison, but because some of the focus of those specific schools are different from UW-Madison, also means that UW-Madison might not be able to compete at all for some of the money if the requirements are worded in a specific way. So the chancellor and the provost have been trying to make the point that they'd like to see the requirements worded in such a way that it's fair for all of the UW system campuses, so that it makes sense, so that the money can be put into a place where it makes sense to put the money, instead of coming up with like an arbitrary rule that means that nobody might get the money or everyone could be eligible, or it's just sort of like, it's an interesting idea on paper, but in practice it's obviously very complicated because all the system schools are very different. So does anybody have any questions about any of the things I presented from the 2 meetings? All right, I think that's it.
Okay, thank you. You're up.
Yep. This will be short, so programming report. So we had the high tea, we had about 50 people attend, so that was great. We had about 24 awards that were issued. All the awards are listed on the Librarians Assembly website, thanks to Pamela. And so I think that went well. If folks have feedback for how the tea went, including criticism, constructive criticism that you'd like to provide, would be great for folks to provide that as we look forward to next year. E-Talk Run has been continuing every month. This past E-Talk Run in month of May is the last for this academic year. If they start up again, and the steering committee will have to talk about that when the new steering committee gets formed, we'll see what happens, but in the past few years they've started up in September. If you have ideas for sessions, please send those along. We welcome those as well as we think about E-Talk Run next year. Generally, we have about between 10 and 25 folks attend those. I think the average is probably somewhere around 15 to 20 in attendance, so those have been well attended. And I think that's it.
Okay. Anything about biking?
Biking. So biking's. So there was an email that was sent out and asking if folks wanted to be put on the biking email list. Those folks have been added. We're in the process of using that list to organize some group rides. If you're on that list, an email should be coming out in the next day or so, announcing some possible dates and asking for feedback on what the rides might be. So that's kind of where things are at with biking.
All right, thank you. And that concludes Librarians Assembly for the year, for the academic year. Special thanks to Steve Fry, Julie, who already left, and Beth, our outgoing steering committee members. And welcome new steering committee members. That's all. Thanks.
And have the food.
Yes.